The night air was cool, and the street lamps cast a pale glow over the quiet neighborhood. A gentle mist clung to the pavement, softening the edges of parked cars and making the world feel hushed and distant. It was a Tuesday in early May 1993, and the houses on Maplewood Drive sat in neat rows, windows dark, lawns trimmed. This was the kind of street where nothing much ever happened, a place where children rode bikes in the evening and neighbors waved on their way to dinner. For officers Maria Lopez and Daniel Chen, it was the final leg of a routine patrol. Maria and Daniel had worked together for 3 years. Maria, with her calm voice and steady gaze, had grown up in a nearby town and joined the force 2 years. Earlier, she liked order and found pride in knowing her neighborhood. Daniel had come from another state, bringing with him a warm smile and a careful sense of humor that made people feel at ease. Together, they made a good team. Tonight they had driven slowly down Maplewood Drive, checking street signs and glancing into dark driveways. Their patrol car's flashlight beam cut through the fog as they ticked off each house. When they reached the T-junction at the end of the street, Maria flicked on the microphone. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14, clear on Maplewood Drive. Heading back to station in 5, her voice was calm, like she was reading from a script. There was nothing in her tone to hint at the unease that would come later. Daniel adjusted the rearview mirror, checking the empty street behind them before switching on the cruiser's blue lights and pulling away. A few minutes later, dispatch crackled over the radio with a faint call. "Officers, we have a report of a minor disturbance at the corner of Cedar and 4th. Neighbors say they heard raised voices around 20 minutes ago." Maria's eyes flicked to Daniel. "We'll check it out," she said, and pressed the mic. "Copy that." Heading. There now. The cruiser's engine hummed as it rolled forward, its tires whispering on the wet asphalt. They turned onto Cedar Street, leaving the quiet safety of Maplewood Drive behind. But they never made it to Cedar and 4th. Their car was found just past the intersection, engine running, lights still on. The doors stood open, as if the 2 officers had vanished into thin air. When a passing driver spotted the idling cruiser, they called dispatch at once. Within minutes, patrol cars swarmed the area. Flashlights bobbed through the fog, and officers in uniform spread out to search every lawn, every bush, and every shadowed. Corner dispatch sent word back that between the 2 officers, neither had failed to check in again. There was no sign of a struggle inside the car. Maria's raincoat, folded neatly on the passenger seat, lay untouched. Daniel's notebook, filled with neat entries about the evening's checks, sat open on the dashboard. The 2 sets of keys dangled from the ignition, and neither weapon was missing. It was as if the officers had stepped out for a moment and simply disappeared. The search party moved outward, following the road and shining lights into nearby alleys. The medical team waited in a squad car, prepared for any emergency. At the station, the chief watched the unfolding reports on a small television screen. His face grew grave as he realized the seriousness of the situation. These were not 2 rookies on their first shift. Maria and Daniel were trusted guardians of the community. The idea that they could vanish without a trace sent a chill through every officer on duty. By midnight, neighbors were roused from their beds. A patrol officer knocked on doors, asking if anyone had seen the patrol car or the officers. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson hurried downstairs in their pajamas. "I heard something," Mrs. Henderson said, voice trembling. A shout or a yell, maybe. It was faint, but it came from near the car. She pointed toward the street where the cruiser had been found. The officer made a note but could not confirm the exact time. The Hendersons were afraid to go outside, so they had not looked closer. Across the street, in a small house with lace curtains, a young man named Kevin sat smoking on his porch. He remembered the flashing lights and the hum of the engine. He thought briefly of calling out, but he felt it was not his place to disturb. Officers at work. Now, he wished he had said something. He walked over to speak with the searching officers, pointing out the faint tire tracks that led off into a side alley. But when the search team followed those tracks, they found nothing but wet grass and a broken twig. As the hours dragged on, the community grew anxious. Rumors spread quickly. Maybe the officers had been taken by someone dangerous. Maybe they had chased a suspect into the shadows and met with foul play. Parents pulled their children inside, locking doors and drawing curtains. Local businesses left lights on overnight, and volunteers offered flashlights and coffee to officers who refused to leave their posts. Vigil lights lined front steps, and strangers brought food to the station to show support. The local news helicopter hovered over the neighborhood at dawn, its rotor blades chopping the misty air. Reporters spoke in hushed tones about the unexplained disappearance. Viewers watched the flickering images of patrol cars with their doors wide open. An anchorwoman said, 2 officers missing without a trace. A small suburban street turned into a scene of mystery. How did they vanish? Where could they be now? The questions felt heavy, hanging over every viewer like the morning fog. By sunrise, the search zone had widened to include nearby parks and wooded areas. K-29 units tracked scents into the trees, but lost the trail in the damp underbrush. Boats scoured a small lake at the edge of town, following every ripple in the water for signs of disturbance. Helicopters scanned rooftops and backyards. No sign of Maria or Daniel emerged. Their fellow officers worked in grim silence, sharing hopeful words and quiet prayers. At the crime lab, fingerprints and physical evidence from the patrol car were cataloged and sent for analysis. Investigators inspected the radio logs, phone records, and past disturbance reports at Cedar and Fourth. Everything pointed to a calm night interrupted by a mystery so deep it felt impossible. The chief ordered every available resource be devoted to finding them. The small department, unprepared for such an event in its simple suburb, called in state police and federal agents to help. Meanwhile, the families of the missing officers waited anxiously at home. Maria's daughter, just 12 years old, sat at the kitchen table with her father. She held a photograph of her mother in uniform and whispered, "She'll come back soon, right?" Her father could only nod, tears in his eyes. Across town, Daniel's elderly parents paced their living room, staring at the empty front hallway where he used to kick off his boots and greet them. They could not understand how their son could vanish on such a familiar street. By the end of the first day, the case had become national news. Newspapers ran headlines questioning the safety of even the calmest neighborhoods. As dusk fell, residents placed candles on their windowsills. Each gentle flame symbolized hope for the officer's safe return. The patrol car remained where it had been found, guarded by flashing lights that stood sentinel through the night. But the night brought no answers. The mist crept back in, muffling the voices of officers as they conducted their final sweep before sunrise. No footprints led away from the scene, no abandoned jackets lay in the grass, no hidden messages offered a clue. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed Maria and Daniel. And somewhere in the dark reaches of the town, someone held a secret one. That would remain hidden for decades, till a new clue in 2024 would append everything everyone thought they knew. But on that first night in May 1993, all that mattered was the empty patrol car and the silent street where 2 officers had disappeared. The mystery began here, under the fog and the street lamps, with a single unanswered question: where had they gone? Years passed, and the quiet street where Maria Lopez and Daniel Chen vanished became a place of memory rather than mystery. The patrol car still sat in evidence storage for a time, with its doors locked and its engine long silent. Detectives replaced the faded street sign at Maplewood Drive, unaware of the small scratch that marked the bumper from that night. For the community, the questions grew louder than the answers. For the investigators, each day without news made the case feel colder. In the months after the disappearance, detectives worked around the clock. They interviewed anyone who had lived nearby in 1993, new homeowners, former neighbors, even delivery drivers who remembered the patrol lights flashing in the fog. They rechecked every scrap of evidence from the car. A single cigarette pack found under the passenger seat was dusted for prints, but only Maria's and Daniel's prints appeared. Forensic labs tested a fuzzy footprint found in the grass, but technology of the time could not make a full match. Every path seemed to lead nowhere. Detectives turned to the nearby woods and the creek where the water ran deep and slow. Search teams pulled on waders and probed the muddy bottom for a patrol jacket or a piece of belt. Trees held no secrets. The night's chill had erased footprints. Underbrush grew thick, swallowing any trace of movement. In lieu of clues, the search grew routine and weary. At the station, the case file grew fat. Officers added newspaper clippings, witness statements, and maps marked with red circles. Every so often, a new detective arrived, scanning through yellowing pages for a fresh angle. Some nights, those new detectives stared at photographs of Maria and Daniel on the evidence room wall. Their uniforms looked crisp and neat, their smiles bright. It was hard to believe they were gone. By the late 1990s, the case had slipped into cold case status. The department designated one detective to monitor it, but his caseload was heavy. He would visit the file once a month, leave a note about nothing new, then return it to the shelf. In station hallways, young officers whispered about the Maplewood mystery in tones of awe. Senior officers forbade jokes about it, knowing wounds still ran deep.
Meanwhile,
The families of the missing officers refused to let memories fade. Husband Javier lasted only one more year on the force. The emptiness he felt without his partner at night patrols was too great. He retired and threw himself into a support group he formed with Daniel's parents. They met every week, sometimes in Javier's living room, sometimes in a church basement. They lit candles for Maria and Daniel, prayed for them, and vowed to keep their stories alive. Each spring, on the anniversary of that night, the group organized a candlelight vigil at the edge of the woods where search dogs had covered ground for weeks. Neighbors brought coffee and donuts. Children who had been toddlers in 1993 now carried signs that said, "We remember and bring them home." Journalists came to record tearful speeches and hold up photographs of the two officers. Smiling in uniform, the community came together, but the solemn energy never coaxed new clues out of the darkness. Small leads flickered sometimes. A truck driver remembered dropping off a load near Maplewood Drive that night. A clerk at a motel 3 miles away recalled cleaning a room where the drapes were open and the lights flickering for hours. Detectives chased these memories, but they dissipated like mist. The truck driver's license plate number faded in his mind. The motel's paper records had been discarded. Time had its own way of swallowing facts. In 2002, a young forensic specialist visited the crime lab after graduating from college. She sifted through old evidence bags and re-examined the cigarette pack with a powerful microscope. The plastic wrapper bore tiny red fibers, perhaps from a jacket. The specialist noted her findings, but the fibers did not match any material. In the evidence locker, without a reference sample, the clue meant little. Detectives formed a task force in 2005, pooling state and federal resources. They combed databases, cross-checked missing persons reports, and looked at cold cases with similar patterns. They even flew to a neighboring state to inspect prison records, wondering if Daniel or Maria might have been taken across the border. They turned pages in jail logs, scanned mugshots, and reviewed parole hearings. Many faces passed before them, but none fit. Slowly, the community moved on. Maplewood Drive returned to normal. Patrol routes changed. Children went to school without glancing at the street where two officers had vanished. The old patrol car was finally dismantled and crushed, as evidence rules allowed, after 10 years. The detectives' offices filled with new lights, new technology, and new cases. But in one corner of the station, the cold case file waited, untouched by progress. Javier and Daniel's parents aged. Javier's gray hair grew thicker and his eyes carried a permanent sadness. He visited Maria's daughter, Elena, every Sunday afternoon. Elena was 19 now, studying art in college. She painted scenes of a woman in uniform walking into fog, hands outstretched, as if calling for help. Her art professor praised the emotional depth of her work. Elena said the paintings were her way of staying close to her mother. Daniel's parents spent their evenings knitting blankets. They often left a chair empty at the dinner table, placing Daniel's uniform folded on it. His father spoke to the uniform as though Daniel could hear. "Come home, son," he would say, voice low. "We have your favorite pie in the fridge." But pie grew stale. The chair grew harder to face. In 2010, a local true crime podcast mentioned the case. Hosts interviewed a former detective who had worked on the initial search. He described the broken twig, the idling car, the eerie stillness. Listeners sent messages to the station with ideas. What if the officers chased someone into the creek? Or maybe they met with a friendly neighbor who kept quiet. Each suggestion became a footnote in another file. Detectives politely thanked the senders, but nothing pointed to a breakthrough. By 2015, technology had leaped forward. Fingerprint. Databases held millions more prints. DNA tests could analyze samples from decades ago. But the cigarette pack and the footprint had been disposed of after evidence rules changed. Only photographs of the prints remained, pinned to a corkboard in the cold case room. Photographs could not reveal new matches. Still, Javier and Daniel's parents never lost hope. They hired a private investigator in 2018, someone who had solved missing person cases using modern methods. He drove through every street, knocked on doors within a mile radius, and spoke to longtime residents who remembered the blue lights cutting through fog. He even traced the ownership of the patrol car parts, hoping a mechanic might recall repairs. The mechanic had no memory. The leads were stale. Throughout those years, a few common threads emerged. Both officers had called dispatch within minutes of leaving Maplewood Drive. Both had a reputation for kindness. Maria often brought lunch to lonely residents, and Daniel regularly volunteered at the community center. Neither had known enemies. No one had motive to harm them. A lack of motive made the case harder, like searching for a missing puzzle piece that had never existed. As the new decade dawned in 2020, the world faced a pandemic that changed life in small towns and big cities alike. Police resources shifted to community health, and cold cases aged further. The Maplewood mystery faded into the background of more urgent crises. Yet on one dusty shelf in the station, the cold case file stayed open, marked active. Then, in 2023, a quiet change began. A young detective named Harper joined the department. She had a sharp mind and a stubborn spirit. On her first day, she noticed the thick file and asked about it. When no one else spoke up, she pored over the contents. She read every report, scanned every photo, and listened to clips of interviews. Something in the wording of a witness statement caught her eye, a reference to a drifter seen near the patrol car. The note was tiny, barely underlined. But Harper felt a spark of possibility. By the end of that year, Harper had petitioned for permission to re-examine stored items from the case. She wanted to look at the cigarette pack again, even though protocols warned against unsealing old evidence. She wanted to test it with the latest DNA tools. She asked to revisit file descriptions, to re-question people who had since moved elsewhere. Her persistence reminded the station of its promise to find Maria and Daniel. So as 2024 approached, the case regained a pulse. The old file stood ready, the families still waiting, and a new generation of investigators prepared to use the power of modern science. The faded photographs and yellowing pages would soon be joined by fresh reports. And far away, far beyond the misty street of 1993, someone held a clue teeny and overlooked that would turn the case upside down. The first week of January 2024 felt like a fresh start for the cold case. Detective Harper walked into the evidence room carrying a small paper bag. Inside was the old cigarette pack found in the patrol car in 1993. The pack's paper was yellowed and brittle, but Harper handled it gently. She placed it under a bright lamp and photographed every angle. Other officers gathered around, curious and hopeful. After years of dead ends, they finally had a lead worth following. Harper knew that modern DNA techniques could do what labs in the 1990s could not. She carefully unwrapped the cigarette pack, using new swabs to collect any trace of skin cells or saliva. The lab technician, Mika, took notes as Harper explained exactly where the pack had been found, under the passenger seat, close to where Officer Lopez should have been sitting. They both agreed that any foreign DNA would be crucial. Mika sealed the swabs and sent them to a state lab with a reputation for high-sensitivity analysis. While they waited for results, Harper dove into the old file. She reread every witness statement, looking for small inconsistencies or forgotten details. One report stood out. A neighbor had seen a white pickup truck parked on Maplewood Drive. Shortly before the disappearance, the time the witness thought nothing of it and did not record a license plate. But Harper realized that truck registrations from 1993 were still archived digitally. If they could find trucks that matched the make and model, they might narrow down suspects. Harper asked the records unit to pull all white pickups. Registered in the county in 1992 and 1993, the list contained dozens of vehicles. For those registered to people with records or a history of drifting between towns, a few names triggered interest. A drifter with a minor vandalism conviction, someone who had been arrested for leaving private property without permission. That person, named Walker, had been released in 1994 and then vanished from official records. Harper noted his file number and requested more information. 2 weeks later, the lab called. The DNA analysts had found a partial profile from the cigarette pack. It did not match any profiles in the national database, but it matched a profile on file from Walker's earlier arrest. Harper felt her heart beat faster. This was the first concrete tie between the case and a person. She obtained a warrant to search Walker's known addresses from the mid-1990s. The plea deal in Walker's vandalism case meant his DNA was in a state database under a pseudonym. Now they could use that to link him to the cigarette pack. Harper led a small team to a storage facility on the outskirts of town where license plates and old vehicle registrations were stored. They found the paperwork for Walker's truck make, Ford model, F150, color, white. It matched the neighbor's vague memory. They also found notes that Walker had sold the truck in 1995 for parts, meaning the vehicle itself no longer existed. But the records showed that he had authorized a friend, a man named Riley, to take the truck's plates before he moved out of state. Riley's name led to a small mechanic's shop where the plates had been used briefly. The search warrant for Riley's shop yielded a surprising find: a discarded jacket in a locked back room. The jacket matched the red fibers found on the cigarette pack in 2002. Although the fibers could not be tested back then, now they could compare them to the cloth inside Riley's donated jacket. The lab confirmed that the fibers on the cigarette pack and the fibers inside the jacket were the same type of wool blend and from the same dye lot. That meant someone wearing that jacket had handled the cigarette pack before it was left under the seat. Meanwhile, Harper arranged to interview Riley. At first, he insisted he only borrowed the truck for a day and knew nothing about Walker's past. He said he had laundry the next morning and dropped the jacket off at the shop's back room. Harper pressed him gently about where Walker had been living in 1993, and who else might have been at the house. Riley hesitated, then admitted that Walker had stayed with him for a few days after the disappearance. Recalled that Walker drove off in a borrowed car, claiming he was heading north for a new job. Armed with this information, Harper turned her attention to Walker's old addresses. She discovered that in May 1993, Walker had been living in a small rental home 5 miles from Maplewood Drive. Neighbors remembered him as a quiet man who sometimes tinkered with cars in his yard. One neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who was 92 and half-blind, recalled seeing 2 officers near Walker's rental on the night of the disappearance. She thought they were delivering a warning about a noise complaint. She said Walker looked surprised and waved them off angrily. Harper took Mrs. Alvarez's statement seriously because it confirmed the location and added context to why Walker might have been near the patrol car. To be thorough, Harper asked for cell tower records from 1993, but cell phones were rare then, and Walker did not have one. Instead, they turned to payphone logs. 2 payphones were near Walker's rental, one inside a convenience store and one outside a laundromat. The laundromat log showed that someone paid with coins for 2 local calls at 11:07 p.m., right around the time the officers radioed dispatch. Unfortunately, the logs did not record phone numbers, but the timing fit. Harper also reviewed old traffic camera footage from a highway patrol camera 50 miles away. The grainy video showed a white pickup traveling late at night on the highway leading north. The date stamp on the footage was May 5, 1993. The truck passed the camera at 11:45 p.m., just 30 minutes after the calls at the payphone. The implication was that Walker or someone driving his truck had been in the area shortly after the officers disappeared. This timeline strengthened the case. With mounting evidence, DNA from the cigarette pack, fiber matches, witness accounts, and timing from payphones and cameras, Harper requested an arrest warrant for Walker. On suspicion of involvement in the disappearance of officers Lopez and Chen, the judge reviewed the evidence and signed the warrant. Harper felt a mix of excitement. In solemn duty, she knew that an arrest would not bring the officers back, but it would offer answers the families had waited for more than 30 years. Detectives headed to an address Walker was believed to use a cabin in a remote county. They found the cabin abandoned, but inside discovered more personal items: an old duffel bag, letters dated 1995, and a faded map marking rural roads. The door frame, scratch marks, suggested someone had moved large objects in and out. There was also a photograph of two young men, one who looked very much like Walker standing beside a patrol car. Harper carefully bagged the photograph and noted its significance. Walker had posed with a police car, possibly stolen or borrowed. It hinted at familiarity, not just fear of law enforcement. The team next discovered that Walker had used another, alias to buy a bus ticket to a city 3 states away. A search warrant for bus company records showed he boarded the bus on May 6, 1993, arriving 2 days later. No one had seen him again in the state. It's confirmed that he fled soon after. The officers vanished, which could indicate guilt or fear. Either way, the flight matched the timeline of the disappearance. With these new findings, Harper coordinated with federal agents to track Walker. They issued an alert for his known aliases and began checking immigration records, bus terminals, and abandoned cabins where he might have stayed. Meanwhile, back at the station, the families of the officers were told that a suspect had been identified. Javier and Daniel's parents listened in silence, tears running down their faces. After decades of uncertainty, they now had a name and a story. In April 2024, Walker was finally located living under another alias in a small town several states away. He was working at a farm, keeping to himself. When federal agents arrived, he was surprised, but cooperated quietly. They read him his rights and escorted him back to the county where the case began. Walker did not resist, but his face remained unreadable. As Walker sat in the interrogation room, Detective Harper entered. She introduced herself and laid out the evidence: the DNA match, the fiber analysis, the payphone calls, the highway camera, and the abandoned cabin items. Walker listened without emotion. When Harper asked why he had been near the patrol car, he looked down for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't mean for it to happen." He refused to speak further without a lawyer, but his words hinted at a moment of panic rather than planned harm. By June 2024, prosecutors had enough to charge Walker. He was booked on 2 counts related to the officer's disappearance. The district attorney announced a court date. The families in the community felt a mix of relief and lingering sorrow. They would finally learn what happened that night. But for now, they waiting for a courtroom, and with it, the truth to come out fully. The case that began on a misty street in 1993 had reached its turning point in 2024, thanks to persistence, modern science, and the belief that no mystery stays hidden forever. Detective Harper arrived at the remote creek bed just before sunrise. The morning air felt crisp, and the gentle rush of water filled the silence. She slipped on waterproof boots and adjusted her flashlight. Other officers and searchers stood by, their breath visible in the cool air. They had marked this spot after analyzing soil from under the officers' boots. Now they believed Maria and Daniel might be here. Harper led the way down a narrow slope. The ground was soft and muddy, speckled with fallen leaves. Search team fanned out along the bank, shining lights into the dark water. A few feet into the creek, Harper saw something pale amid the stones. She knelt and ran her fingers along the edge. At first, she thought it was a piece of clothing caught on a rock. Then she recognized the weave, heavy canvas, the same style as a patrol jacket. Her heart tightened. With careful hands, she lifted the jacket from the water. The fabric was stiff with age, but the badge and name tag Lopez were still visible. The team gently placed it into a dry bag for evidence. Harper's eyes glistened. She had found a piece of the puzzle that eluded investigators for 30 years. Even so, she knew the real answers lay deeper. As the sun broke through the trees, the search turned to the muddy bank. Harper spotted a slight depression in the earth under a cluster of shrubs. She crouched and brushed away leaves.
Oh, that's...
Ground felt softer beneath her fingers. A metal buckle glinted in the beam of her flashlight. Other officers gathered around. They used shovels to clear the mud carefully. Soon, they revealed a small, shallow grave. Inside lay two objects: a patrol belt buckle and a folded sleeve of a uniform shirt. There was no alarming Sino blood or signs of violence. It felt more like a quiet place of hiding than a crime scene. But to Harper, it spoke volumes. The officers had not run away. They had been taken here and left. The solemn discovery brought a hush over the search team. Forensic teams arrived and began cataloging the items. They noted wear and tear consistent, with long exposure to water and soil. Each artifact was sealed for lab work. Harper watched as technicians wrapped the objects in fresh evidence bags. She felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the peaceful night that had ended in loss, and relief that the families could finally know where their loved ones had been. A week later, lab results arrived. Tissue samples from the jacket lining and shirt sleeve contained degraded, but matchable DNA. They confirmed the remains had indeed come from the missing officers. The district attorney informed Javier and Daniel's parents in person. Javier touched the evidence bags, his hands trembling. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he whispered, "Thank you," placed his hand over his heart, as if guarding his. Memories of Maria. With the physical evidence secured, the investigation turned to Walker's role. Prosecutors studied his brief statement. "I didn't mean for it to happen." They needed to understand what really happened that night in 1993. They summoned Riley to testify. Under oath, Riley described how Walker had seemed nervous in the days after the disappearance. He said Walker told him he had scared them off when they asked about the stolen car. Walker claimed they discovered his car had been taken illegally, and he panicked. In a closed hearing, Walker's recorded interview with Harper played for the court. He spoke in a low voice. "I didn't want to hurt them," he said. "They found my stolen license plates. I thought they would arrest me on the spot. I grabbed them, told them to leave. But they resisted." He paused and swallowed. "Pushed, they fell into the creek. I tried to pull them out, but I was alone and afraid. I knew I couldn't call for help." His words were plain, simple, but heavy with regret. A prosecutor asked why Walker had not come forward. He answered, "I looked at them lying there and imagined prison. I drove away and hid. I thought maybe one day I could fix it, but I never knew how." His honesty sent a murmur through the courtroom. Some judges and jurors looked at him with pity, others with anger. The family sat with stiff backs, eyes fixed on Walker's face. Outside the courtroom, the media described a crime of panic rather than cold violence. Headlines read, "Fear leads to tragedy," and "Officer deaths." Later than thought, the subtle shift in language mattered. It was not a premeditated kill, but a series of fearful decisions. Still, 2 lives were lost. 2 families endured a lifetime of questions. At a second hearing, the judge ruled that Walker would face charges of negligent manslaughter in the deaths of officers, Lopez and Chen. Sentencing was scheduled 4 months later. In the meantime, Walker remained in custody. He attended a brief memorial at the station where a small crowd of officers, neighbors, and family remembered the 2 friends who vanished that night. During the memorial, Harper spoke softly. "We found truth in this case because we never gave up. We honored Maria and Daniel by keeping their stories alive." Javier stepped forward and added, "We know you brought them home to this creek. That means more than words." He laid a single white rose at a makeshift shrine by the creek's edge. As summer arrived in 2024, the station unveiled new cold case procedures. Harper's success inspired other departments to reopen files long forgotten. A small plaque in the station honors Lopez and Chen, reminding officers that every missing person deserves to be found. The memory of that misty street in 1993 lives on. It's not as a mystery unsolved, but as a story of persistence and healing. For the families, the years of pain eased slightly. Alina, Maria's daughter, visited the creek with her father. She filled a small jar with creek water, and labeled it Mom's Creek. She drew a picture of her mother's patrol car, parked under street lamps. Javier placed the drawing in his living room. He said it would stay there until Elena was ready to hang. It was proof that her mother's final watch had ended with dignity. Daniel's parents often walked to the memorial plaque. His mother carried a small bouquet of daisies. She placed them at the base and whispered, "We remember you." His father stood quietly, tracing the badge etched into the metal. "Dad," he said, "you served us well." They did not speak of sorrow, but of respect. Meanwhile, Walker waited for sentencing. He took classes in anger management and empathy behind bars. He wrote letters to Javier and Daniel's parents. In them, he expressed deep sorrow and asked for any chance at forgiveness. The letters arrived with heavy envelopes. Javier read them aloud to Elena and Daniel's parents. The words were simple, and forgiveness felt distant. But the chance to understand mattered more than hate. On sentencing day, the courtroom was filled with officers in dress uniforms, community members, and family. Walker stood alone at the front, head bowed. The judge spoke of loss, regret, and the importance of admitting mistakes. He said this tragedy should remind us all to face our fears without hurting others. Walker was sentenced to a term that balanced punishment and a chance to learn. He would serve years in a rehabilitation program before release. After the hearing, Javier approached Walker, shook his hand, and said, "We will never forget, and we will never hate." Daniel's father added, "You lived with this secret for 30 years. Let it be a lesson to others." Walker nodded, tears in his eyes. Life in the town moved forward. New officers drove down Maplewood Drive, glancing at the shrubs and creek. They knew the story not as a ghost tale, but as a testament. Maria and Daniel became symbols of service and community. Each year, the candlelight vigil returned, now at the creek's edge instead of the woods. The small group lit candles and read names. The flame reflected in the water, a gentle promise that they would never be forgotten. In late 2024, Elena signed up for the police academy. She wore her mother's badge number on a pin. She told Harper, "I want to serve the same way she did." Harper smiled and said, "Your mother would be proud." Elena's uniform fit loosely, but her grip on her flashlight was steady. Detective Harper often visited the creek alone. She thought of that foggy night in 1993 and the long road to this moment. She whispered, "We found you, scattered." White flowers on the water, and watched them float downstream, carrying memories forward. The mystery was solved, but the story of hope, of loss, and of justice would flow on forever. The courtroom was quiet as the judge's gavel fell for the final time in the trial. Walker stood at the front, his shoulders slumped and his face pale. Round him, friends of the missing officers, fellow police, neighbors, and family watched. With heavy hearts, for 31 years, they had waited for this moment. Now, at last, they had answers. Outside the courthouse, Javier Lopez hugged his daughter Elena. Tears slid silently down their faces as they held each other. Javier whispered, "We can finally say goodbye." Elena nodded, clutching the small badge pin she planned to wear on her uniform. She had joined the academy the week before, determined to carry on her mother's legacy. "She'd be proud," Elena said softly, and Javier kissed her forehead. A few blocks away, Daniel Chen's parents stood beneath a tall oak tree. His mother held a single white rose, and his father placed a hand on his shoulder. "It is done," his mother said, voice gentle. "We know what happened." Daniel's father nodded. "Now, we can remember him as he was kind, brave, and always ready to help." They let the rose float down a small fountain. Watching the petals drift away, back at the police station, Detective Harper gathered her team in the briefing room. Photos of Lopez and Chen were pinned to a board, smiling faces captured in moments before that foggy night. Harper spoke with calm pride. "We did this together. We honored their memory and brought truth to light." Her team nodded, some blinking back tears. They had worked years to uncover the story. Harper knew each of them felt the weight of every discovery and every setback. in the days that followed. The department held a small ceremony by the creek where the officers' jackets had been found. Local musicians played soft tunes while neighbors lit candles on the creek's bank. Javier, Alina, and Daniel's parents spoke of service, love, and the healing power of truth. Lena released a paper lantern into the sky, drifted upward. Glowing against the twilight, carrying her mother's name beyond the trees. At home that night, Javier looked at Maria's empty desk in the living room. He had kept it untouched since the disappearance. On it sat Maria's favorite coffee mug, a stack of her notebooks, and a framed photo of her smiling. Javier flipped through her notes, saw observations of the community, ideas for outreach, messages from grateful neighbors. He closed the notebook gently, feeling both sorrow and comfort. He whispered, "You're finally at peace." In the academy, Alina worked on her first patrol simulation. She practiced radio calls and learned to read maps. Her instructors praised her calm voice, her steady hand, and the spark of empathy she showed when role-playing with citizens in need. Alina carried her mother's badge pin on her lapel, a reminder of the promise she made years ago to keep serving, no matter what. Meanwhile, Walker awaited his sentence in a small holding cell. He sat on a narrow bed, a sheet pulled around him, like a shield. He wrote letters each day, some addressed to Javier and Daniel's parents, others to his own family. In each letter, he spoke of regret and regret alone. He wrote, "I will carry this truth with me for as long as I live. I am sorry." The letters piled up on his bunk, silent confessions in neat handwriting. On sentencing day, the courtroom was full again. Walker stood before the judge and listened as the victims' families shared their thoughts. Javier spoke of forgiveness, saying, "I do not hate you, but I will never forget." Daniel's father added, "May you learn from this and help others avoid such fear-driven mistakes." The judge then pronounced the sentence a prison term balanced with mandated counseling and community service once he was released. As Walker was led away, turned and offered a small nod to the families. It was not a smile, but it was acknowledgement. The families watched as he passed through the door, then turned back to each other. "Let's go home," Javier said, folding his daughter's hand into his. Together, they walked into the daylight. Leaving the courthouse behind, in the months that followed, the town changed in small, meaningful ways. The police department upgraded its cold case unit with new technology and added training on handling missing officer incidents. Officers walked Maplewood Drive with fresh eyes, checking street signs and lampposts with extra care. Community groups organized safety nights, where neighbors met officers over hot chocolate and shared contact information. Trust grew stronger, built on the memory of Maria and Daniel. Detective Harper continued her work. But she often returned to the creek where the jackets had been found. She would stand on the bank, gaze at the flowing water, and remember those quiet moments of discovery. She carried a notebook in which she wrote thoughts about justice, hope, and the power of persistence. She wrote, "No secret stays hidden if someone cares enough to look." Alina graduated from the academy and pinned on her badge in a ceremony at the station. Javier and Daniel's parents sat in the front row, tears in their eyes. Harper placed a wreath made of white flowers around Elena's neck. "Your mother would be proud," Harper said. Alina smiled through her tears, speaking firmly into the microphone. "I will serve with honor and kindness, just like she did." At home that evening, Javier and Alina sat at the kitchen table over tea. Alina showed him her new uniform photos. Her jacket fit perfectly, and her badge gleamed. Javier watched his daughter, so grown up, yet so like her mother in spirit. He raised his mug in a quiet toast. "To Maria, and to you." Alina clinked her mug against his and said, "To service and to remembering." As the years passed, the story of the two officers became part of the town's history. School children learned about them in local history classes. A small bronze plaque was placed at the creek's edge, bearing their names and the dates they served. Each morning, the town's new officers paused at the plaque, touching it before heading out on patrol. On the 30th anniversary of the disappearance, the community held another ceremony. Neighbors, friends, and officers gathered with candles. and flowers. Lena now served as an officer herself, guiding the vigil with calm words. She spoke of the search that lasted decades, of the breakthrough in 2024, and of the power of never giving up. She ended by saying their story reminds us that every life matters and that, together, we can bring light to the darkest mysteries. Far away, Walker served his sentence, reflecting quietly on the night he panicked. He helped teach anger management classes to fellow inmates, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. He spoke of fear leading to tragedy and urged others to face trouble with honesty and courage. His words were not meant to excuse his actions, but to prevent similar harm. Back in the town, life settled into a steady rhythm. The creek still flowed, carrying leaves and memories downstream. Patrol cars glided along the streets at dawn, their drivers watchful but calm. Children played in yards, sometimes catching glimpses of medals and ribbons shining in their parents' study rooms. The past was respected and honored, but it did not hold the town back. In her small house at the edge of town, Harper penned the final pages of her report on the case. She wrote of lessons learned, the importance of fresh eyes on old evidence, the power of modern forensics, and the need to keep stories alive through years of doubt. She closed the report with a simple line: "Justice may come slowly, but it will come if we do not surrender hope." That summer, Alina visited her mother's favorite bakery. She bought 2 pastries, one for herself and one for her father, and brought them to the creek bank. She placed them on a small bench near the plaque. She closed her eyes and offered a silent thanks to her mother, to Daniel, and to everyone who had searched for the truth. Then she and Javier sat together, eating warm pastries as the creek glimmered in the morning sun. And so the story of the 2 officers who vanished in 1993 came full circle. It began with a foggy night, a silent patrol car, and a mystery that tested faith and patience. It ended with a clue found in 2024, a courtroom filled with hope and sorrow, and a community forever changed by love and service. Their memory lived on in plaques, in badge pins, in family stories, and in every act of kindness that honored their names. The mystery had been solved, but their legacy would flow on, just like the gentle creek that carried their story into the future.